morning. I'm going to first share a reading from Exodus 2:23 to 3:12. After a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. Out of the slavery, their cry for help rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said further, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on the account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings. And I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm going to cheat a little bit here. To the country of all the ites. There's a lot of them. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppress them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He said, I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain. Who am I? Said Moses. When I reflect on that question, who am I? The easiest answer for you is I am Laura Boesen. If some of you may have known me as Laura Hurley from 2012 to 2016, a student of Hastings College. But that is a question that plagued me, who am I, when I first had a call to enter the prison system. Who am I to think I can just go in there and teach them anything? Who am I to think that I can relate to them? And quite honestly, who am I to care? I like to share my first experience ever inside a prison with people. It was in a federal prison for women in Minnesota. I went in as a volunteer to teach a course called Houses of Healing. It's about childhood trauma. It's a faith-based course. And I had, at the time, 10 women in my very first class. Till the very minute I joined them in my classroom, the who am I was haunting me in my head. People often ask, were you scared? Is it scary to go into a prison? And of course the answer is yes, it's a prison. But I was scared for reasons that people sometimes don't think of. Truly, I was scared that I would sit down and I would try to teach these women, I would try to engage with these women, and I would be met with complete silence. That they wouldn't receive me well. I hadn't been to prison myself. Prior to hearing their stories, I hadn't even been able to imagine a childhood like some of them experienced. So who was I to be there? Over the next few weeks, and hopefully through the stories that I share with you, you're going to realize exactly why I believe God called on me to enter that prison. When I got there, the officer dropped me off into this empty classroom with stacks of orange chairs that you'd likely find in an elementary school or a middle school, those plastic orange chairs. He looked at me and said, "Got about 5 minutes until they get here. I'll be down the hall. Yell if you need anything." And I said, "Oh, you're leaving me? I will be here, okay." Didn't know that was part of the deal, but great. So he leaves, and I'm standing in an empty classroom, and I'm like, what am I doing here? So usually with everything, if I start to get overwhelmed, I say, do the simple thing first, Laura. Just do the simple thing first. To me, the simple thing was, we need a place to sit, put out the chairs. I put 11 chairs in a circle, and pretty soon I heard over the intercom, 10-minute move, 10-minute move. That alerts everyone within the system that the offenders now have 10 minutes to get from where they were to where they're going. So I knew that my first students were about to arrive. The doors open and women start to file in, and I'm asking their names and trying to check off my roster, trying to act like I'm not freaked out and unsure of what I'm doing. And they all sit down, and there's one chair left in the circle. I set it up just like I would any college class I was teaching, because at the time I was teaching at Gustavus. And I joined the circle. I took the last chair. And I looked at them and I said, "Hi, my name's Laura. I'm sure you have many questions for why I'm here. So let's go ahead and get started." And I let them just ask me what I was doing there. The thing about prison is trust is hard to earn. They looked at this young white female and thought, what is her angle here? Majority of volunteers are retired and belong to a church. What is this young girl doing here? What are her intentions? So I let them ask, and I was honest with them. I wasn't really sure what I was doing there, but my intention was to bond with them, to learn from them and to teach them. So we started to do exactly that. At the end of that first session with them, it was 2 hours long, I asked them, what surprised you? Or what are you taking away? Or what would you like to see moving forward? Because I believe that feedback is important. And this one woman who had been, quite honestly, mean-mugging me the entire 2 hours, looks around and says, "Fine, I'll go." I said, "Great, what you got?" She said, something surprised me. And I said, "Okay." And she goes, "But I have a question first." And I said, "That's fine, what's your question?" She said, "How many times have you been in a prison?" And I said, "This is my first time." She looked at me and said, "This isn't your first time." I said, "This is my first time." She said, "There's no way." And I said, "How come? What are you trying to say?" And she said, "You're looking at us like people. No one comes in here their first time and does that. There's no way this is your first time in a prison." And I said, "I'm sorry that's been your experience, but this is my first time ever stepping into a prison, and guess what? You are a person. And that is why I'm looking at you the way I'm looking at you." And I said, "Now tell me what surprised you." And she said, "There were 11 chairs in a circle." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I was confused when I walked in because I knew the class maximum was 10. And I said, "Okay." And she said, "What shocked me most was you sat in the last chair. You sat with us." It's a decision I didn't even really consciously make, right? To take that last chair was something I did in every single college group I've ever ran. I sit with them. It makes it easier to talk. It's easier to engage. They can see me. I can see them. But that was a decision that impacted the rest of my time in prison. It's the one decision that allowed for her to open up and say, "Hey, I trust you. You joined us." There was a joke that they made when I told them about my fears that I was going to be met with silence, and they said, "Laura, we're women. All we do is talk. How could you have been scared about that?" And while that's true, my experience in local jails and my experience in men's state penitentiary, which came later, it wasn't unique to the women. The men were equally as engaged with me. They were craving that connection. They were craving to learn. When I first entered the prison system, my idea was that I would be working with people who would release to prison, or release from prison. It's about 90% returning to your communities. And my goal was to make sure that once they left, they didn't come back. They left a different person than they came in. What I didn't expect to happen was I didn't expect to be met in my first few weeks there by a lifer, a man serving life in prison, without the potential for parole. And he shared with me that there hadn't been programming for lifers in at least 20 years. He had already served 30 years of his life prison sentence. He hadn't stepped into a programming classroom for the last 20. I asked him if that was policy or what was the reasoning, and he said, "We've not been able to find someone willing to teach us." Why should we? They're in prison for the rest of their life. They're not coming home. They're not getting out. Why should we care? So I looked at him and I said, "Guess what? We're going to start a group of lifers then." And he rolled his eyes and said, "Yeah, okay, teach." And that was the first time he called me teach, and he would continue to call me teach the next 2 years prior to his release from prison. A man serving life in prison without the potential for parole received commutation, and then he received parole, and he is now out on the streets. A man we said, "Why should we care? He will never return," is now living a successful life on the outside. It's men like that, it's women like the ones who I met in my classroom that fill me with joy and bring me back into the prison system. I've worked at many different places. I've explored many different career paths, had intelligent conversations. I've met CEOs, I've met amazing college students, I've met doctors, lawyers, the whole spectrum. And some of my most powerful, insightful, intelligent conversations have come from inside the prison walls. The men and women who are serving time should not be forgotten. My goal for them and what I share with them is I hope that 2 things happen when they spend time with me inside prison. The first is I hope that I am a reminder and a reflection to them that they are human, that their humanity is not stripped away by being inside a prison wall. The second is that I hope when I spend an hour with them, that that hour feels like they're not in prison no longer. It's bringing them out of that prison for just an hour. And I get to explore that with them, and I get to live that out with them. I believe that the day they are sentenced, they're sentenced to prison. It's the taking away of their freedom that's the punishment. It is not my responsibility to punish them every day after. It's my responsibility to bring them hope, to bring them joy, to allow them to forget that they are in prison, even if it's just for an hour. When I reflect back on starting at prison, which was 4 years ago now, it makes me almost laugh that I had the thoughts of who am I? God knew what he was doing the entire time. He knew exactly who he was sending into the prison. I see some people in the crowd that knew me either in college or they were students of mine when I was working at the college. And maybe it surprises them. I don't know. But if you know my personality, I'm the exact type of personality that can bring humanity back into a prison. And I take pride in that. And I've lived into it and I've leaned into it. My burning bush may not have been a plant on fire in the middle of a desert. It took me reading a book to have a nag in my heart to say, who are you serving? And is it the right population? Like I said, I didn't have a heart for people in prison prior to this experience. It took me going inside the walls. It took me meeting these individuals for my eyes and my heart to be open to them. And that's not going to be everyone's calling in this group. And I understand that and I respect that. But it's my calling. And if it's one that even itched your heart a little bit today, I would love to be able to explore that with you. I encourage you to listen to those itches, to find your burning bush, not to turn away, but to turn towards it and ask, who am I? But not in doubt, not who am I, but who am I? And what can I do? And I appreciate being here with you today.